Right, it's now, here in the so it's now the time to start the Ask Me Anything panel. I give maybe just a few more seconds for people to pop into the audience. Some people.
Oh.
Tony, I don't know if you're able to, the chat, but people are saying hello.
Oh, no, sorry. I'm just getting all the icons for everyone. Hello,
We'll let people
everybody.
kinda we'll let people kind of funnel in for now, but all right, hi everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us this Ask Me Anything panel, and I'm here to host the panel. I'm also here with Avu. Avu, if you want to say hi.
Hi, everybody. Hope y'all are doing okay.
Avu will be helping me with some of the questions, and we're here with the one and only Tony Gardner. If you guys are, of course, just now coming in, Tony Gardner and his company were responsible for not only the visuals of Human After All, the music videos, but also the helmets themselves, and also Electroma. And we actually left this out earlier, but they also did a little bit of the prosthetic effect, were of course amazing. I also know his company's work. From the Child's Play series, Hairspray, Jackass Forever, which was a really fun one. Basically all over the place. You probably have seen your work out and about. But we're here today because today marks 20 years of Human After All, which is kind of amazing that
Crazy.
it's been that. But Tony, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to be
Oh,
able to
yeah.
dive into these questions and talk
Thanks.
all about your work, which is
Thanks
amazing.
for
It's
having me.
also of course, it's also kind of the you think of Daft Punk, most people tend to think of how they appeared for Human After All, which is really
Oh,
saying
right.
something. It's such an influential era.
Yeah.
Alright, so we're gonna dive right in. So we like to kinda do our questions chronologically. So our first question on the docket is, how did you first get into the world of special effects work?
Um, Special effects in general, I was the weird kid in the neighborhood that made movies with my friends, and we made weird props and effects, and I was into music and magic and theater, and um, special effects was just a part of that. When I came out to California from Ohio, I focused more on the effects because it was an easier avenue into filmmaking because I felt I had more experience in that, and I've always been very artistic and like doing stuff with my hands. So I was hired actually to be a runner by Rick Baker on a music video called Michael Jackson's Thriller when I was 19, and I was offered 4 weeks worth of work. He told me you're kind of all over the place as far as your interest, but maybe after 4 weeks of doing this, you might decide that you want to do special effects. And he was right. My 4 weeks turned into 4 years working for him, and I got to build all the zombies that are in the backgrounds. I got to build a zombie on myself. I got to be in it. I got to go on set. I had the full experience of working on film within that first project, and I was pretty much hooked. So I stuck with it and started my own company after working for Rick, and here I am.
Right, and you were the first zombie in the Thriller video, weren't you? The very first one we see?
Yes, when they go skipping past the graveyard and the camera pushes into the first grave, I'm the very first one that comes out. And then John Landis liked my look. So my arm falls off partway through that. I'm in the dance scene just as a close up, thankfully, because I can't dance. And then I'm in the theater scene as myself as well. And then in the very end, I'm in the room when all the zombies come in on Michael and Ola. I'm the one on the far left. So it was a great experience. And, I didn't look back after that. I actually dropped out of school. I was a drummer in the marching band at USC, and I actually did not tell the band director that I dropped out of school, and I stayed in band the whole first year of working on film at the same time. So there you go.
It's such an incredible, like, first entry into the industry story. That's you.
Yeah, so
Um,
lucky, and it was really only supposed to be 4 weeks, and then they asked me to stick around, and I got to build the bladders for the werewolf transformation first, I think, and experiment with that, and then it just kept going from there. So whatever opportunity you
so
take.
pardon me. No, keep going. We love to hear about it. That's incredible.
No, that's I'm just saying whatever opportunity comes your way, say yes. I didn't have that much experience, but I was more than happy to start, and I started being the guy who swept the floors and took out the trash and picked up supplies, and then gradually got integrated into the crew, and then got to be a zombie. And I was 19, and it was just a great start.
Incredible. Speaking of starts, our next question, Tamani02 asks, which helmet, or pardon me, I totally skipped over somebody else's question. Our actual next question of beginnings is, how were you first introduced to Daft Punk robots, or the robots to?
I was working on a movie called Three Kings with someone I thought was an actor named Spike Jones, and Spike kept saying he was a director, and turns out he was. I ended up working on a couple of his films. He was friends with both the guys in Daft Punk, and they came to Spike asking Spike's advice for someone to help them figure out how to create this new persona. And Spike basically said, "My friend Tony, if my friend Tony can't figure it out, I don't know who could." So they kind of cold called me and came out one day and brought a CD of their music, and we were working on Shallow Hal at the time. We had all these bodysuits and stuff around, and nothing related to what they wanted to do. But they trust Spike, and then we got into discussions on it. And they had some sketches from two directors that they work with in France, named Alex and Martine, and they had kind of roughed out some ideas based on Japanese anime that were pretty cool, and that was really truly the foundation of how the design started.
That's incredible. So our next question is also on the helmets, the every helmet specifically, since that's where our helmets begin. Mario 2 asks, finally, which helmet was the most difficult to design? Which was the most difficult to make in practice? And which went through the most iterations? And what are they made of?
Oh, okay, that's a big question. The most difficult one was Guimond's because there was such a huge blank canvas in the front, and we wanted it to all have a readout. And at the same time, obviously, we had to put somebody in it who had to be able to see and be able to breathe. So that was the most complex. Tamaz was more traditional helmet shape, and we had a visor, we had a narrower area to work in for the readouts and stuff like that. We had some more circuitry and stuff on the sides on both of them. But the front panel for Guimond's was just so big, and it was curved. And we were trying to make sure that we'd get a readout the whole way through. If we were doing it nowadays, their preference back then was actually if you could bend a TV screen and fit that into the helmet, that would be what they would prefer to do. And that wasn't an option with the technology at the time. So we went with the next best thing, which was basically color changing LEDs. And we actually brought down the guy that did the Jumbotron from San Francisco, who designed that and the readouts and the programming in order to get all the pictures and images on that. And this is obviously way before billboards were just scrolling through um, different videos and stuff like that. So it was a lot of equipment as well as a lot of work to figure out. The LEDs were all full size. All of them had 3 wires coming out. All those wires have to go somewhere and allow somebody to see through that. So technically, that was the most complex. And then just getting a really nice curve and everything else. Again, nowadays we'd do it three-dimensionally and make sure it was perfect, but it was all done by hand. It was sculpted by hand in clay, and then molded, and then the parts from there were cast in fiberglass, and those were body shopped, and then that was metallized. And we experimented with actual metal plating as well as metallizing, vacuum metallizing. And depending on which iteration of the helmet you're looking at, there were different things used for each one. Guimond's also had the little readout of a pulse in the ear, in the circle that's in the center of the ear, and that was all an LED readout, um, because we couldn't get a little screen or anything, at that point in time. So there was a lot of trial and error, and all the hardware that came out of the helmet had to go somewhere. So we ended up building backpacks on their back that, like a little fiberglass shell they could wear under their wardrobe, that once they put the helmet on, all of the weight of all the motor and the fan and all the wires and everything else went onto that backpack, like clipped onto that, and then there was a chrome cover that fit over it to disguise all of that. But everything in the heads ran off of a Makita battery. And we had an opening in the bottom of the backpack where we would change out batteries after things started to, die off. The batteries lasted maybe like an hour and a half. But the first iterations of the helmets also had gauntlets that they both wore, and the gauntlets had buttons on them. Tomas had buttons where he could actually, on one arm, type out a response that would read across his face. And on the other arm, he had buttons that were pre-programmed answers. And then there were also visuals for, like, we had a program that was eyes that blink and stuff like that for him. And he had a button he could press for that. Keyman had the same thing, but his was all, the whole idea was Tomas was the talker and Keyman was all visual imagery. So there were never words on him. It was always, what sort of graphics can we fit into an oval that's curved that'll read from the sides as well as from the front. And then he was able to control that himself. Did I answer all those questions? There were a lot in there.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
kind of
it
a
seems like
packed.
so.
Okay,
Yeah, that
good.
was actually another question that didn't quite make it into the, our little lineup of questions. Somebody had asked if the reason, Tomas's helmet has a mouth, but not Guimand's is because he's the talkative one of the 2.
Oh
So it's
yeah.
nice to hear that was the thought process.
And just design wise, the idea of the mouth for Guimond's, it's kind of almost where the gold meets the visor. But the very first visors were different. Guimond's visor was gold, so it was gold helmet with a gold face. So he was all very monochromatic. Tomas was red and it faded to black on the sides so that the lights from the sides didn't come through red so that they could read their true colors. Um, and they realized, I think after the first photo shoot, that with Guimond, everything that was in front of him was reflected in his head. Literally, the camera, the people standing there taking the pictures, everything. So, that all got dulled down very quickly.
I find it so interesting that it was just powered by Nokia batteries. It must have been so influential for the time.
Well, we had been doing special effects characters for films that we would have like battery powered blow dryer kind of units to blow air into their characters' mouths to keep them cool and stuff like that. And we had designed that using, a power drill battery. We just took that same idea and used it for these helmets, and it worked great and easy enough to charge, easy enough to buy anywhere you went, you know. So it wasn't like you had to hook up a bunch of wires or anything like that. Just plug a battery into a socket and go.
Yeah, definitely striving for convenience over everything, I suppose. That makes sense. But I just want to add, I'm also a former band kid, so I thought that was a really interesting factoid. I was also a drummer in the band, so that was like, oh
Oh,
wow, like I had no idea that he was that cool. But moving
uh,
on to the next question, it is pretty much related to what we were just speaking of. But were there any helmet designs that we haven't seen that were rejected or scrapped or just didn't really make the cut at the end of the day?
yeah, we had a lot in the very beginning that didn't get past like the sketching phase. Most of the work done back then was pen and pencil and colored pencil. I mean, it's so long ago at this point. Um, there are quite a few, and the original design that Thomas and Guillemot wanted to do for the gauntlet didn't really work with wardrobe. It would actually sort of round out their forearms to look a little too much like Popeye. So we tried to flatten it and square it out, which went against their original intent, which was something that was a lot more sleeker. But the original designs, I actually pulled them up. I mean, to be honest with you, I wanted to do this Q&A from my studio because we actually have one of the robot DJ from Technologic and a bunch of other stuff to show. And I have a lot of the illustrations. So if we ever do this again, if you guys ever want to, I'd be more than happy to walk you guys through a bunch of history, I guess, basically. Um, whether it's the sketches or actual pieces.
Oh, I think everybody
But
would love that. Yeah.
yes,
That's
I'm
really
not sure if you could
interesting.
see the chat. Yeah, it's all like, "Please, please, please," in
Oh,
the chat with all the
Yeah, so we may have to take you up on that offer here pretty soon whenever you're available because
yeah. I
everybody
mean, we
seems to be
just got.
pretty on board with that.
Unfortunately, I live up where we get snow, and we got snowed in. We had over a foot of snow, and I just couldn't get out with any guarantee of getting back. They actually closed the mountain last night. So otherwise, we would have done that today. But I'm more than happy to come back whenever you guys want to and make it happen.
Well, thank you, that's awesome. We love that you're so like us, also just so passionate about your work.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's kind of for any artist, what you do is an extension of yourself. And I think the people that enjoy what they do the most create the most interesting stuff because to a certain degree, it's for them, you know. Same with
Yeah,
music.
that's what
I
it's
mean,
all about.
yeah, it's just a different version of art and expression. So it's just
And
nice to
Human After All
collaborate
was
with people.
definitely
I'm
artsy.
sorry, what's that?
I was just saying that Human After All is definitely artsy, has a
Oh,
reputation for itself.
yeah. It's funny because there were so many things that were going to happen prior to that for the album previous, and there was an issue with Virgin Records, and there were a bunch of videos that were started that were never completed. Treatments were written for them. The whole idea was all the videos would sort of fit together as chapters in a story, sort of what they did with the music videos for Interstellar 5555. I always leave off the last five. Um, and we didn't get to do any of that, but some of that stuff that was built for some of those videos that didn't happen ends up showing up in different ways later in their career or in other music videos, which is kind of fun.
It's fascinating. I don't think we've ever heard that before. Do you have any examples of some of the things that pop up later on that get reused?
Sure. One of the earlier music videos we were going to do was going to be the Daft characters as little robot versions. Well, little miniature versions of themselves, basically animatronic puppets, kind of like what the robot DJ was in Technologic. And the two guys were going to be mixing in a little um, sound studio, a sound booth that was plywood and paneling. And the walls were going to drop down and they were going to stand up out of their chairs and they were going to walk out and they were actually going to be in the middle of Times Square and just walk down the street. And that was going to be the end of the video. And that paneled um, room shows up in I think it was the American Music Awards. Warren Food designed a set based on that. And then the helmets that we actually made the little guys and scaled the wardrobe down and everything, and we're ready to go. And the helmets that were done in miniature became the heads for the babies and the infants in the Electroma film, because there's that whole town that's populated by robots and we needed helmets of different sizes. So there's like a lady pushing a stroller and the robot baby in that is wearing one of the helmets from a music video from years prior that didn't happen. So there's a resurfacing of things, and the robot DJ from Technologic is the guts of the idea for the music video of them as the little miniature DJs in New York City. So there's a lot of stuff that aesthetically, the shows up in some manner or another.
Yeah, and there was a photo shoot, wasn't there, that you were part of with the little, miniature Daft Punks?
Yes, there was. There was a photo shoot where we had the little guys in sort of like a post-apocalyptic set with a bunch of crumbling concrete and like just basically it looks like a blown up parking garage because that's what it was. We had done a miniature parking garage for a Terminator 2 ride at Universal Studios. And we had saved part of the miniature set from that. So that became the set behind the little robots for their photo shoot.
Wow, that is fascinating. I hope we get to see, some of these scrap designs see the light of day again. This is the perfect year for them.
Yeah,
20
I think we're going
years.
to try and post a lot of stuff on our Instagram for both the shop and myself so that people can see stuff. We started posting some stuff from Primetime yesterday and today that's more behind the scenes ish. But we're in going through files. I didn't realize just how much I had hoarded. So there's actually a lot to share. So we'll try and get that out.
Well, that's fantastic. I'll for everybody listening, I'll make sure to put like in our announcements, links to go follow so that way everybody gets to see them as soon as they go live. But yeah, we'll definitely be looking forward to seeing everything because that's incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, our next question here is from Wub. Wub has a few questions that were really good, so we'll just a lot of them are from Wub. So
Okay.
they asked, Human After All was a dramatic tonal shift from Discovery. Were you aware of this transition into a darker, more rustic aesthetic, or were you less familiar with their product beforehand?
Um, I was aware of what was going on only because they gave me the CD of the music in advance of its release when they started talking about doing music videos for it. So I got the tone right away. And then we started talking about their look and what they wanted to do with themselves. And we were really wanting to go darker all around. And then, like Tama, we changed his mouth shape on his very first helmet had sort of a smile shape to it. It had upturned corners on both sides that come to a point. And we killed the points and we just made it more neutral and blank. And we did the same with both of them. We pulled out all the electronics, got rid of the backpack, streamlined their whole look. And then we actually put in LEDs for Gimon that were green eyes that they could use just two small green dots. And then Thomas had um, a red, a full red screen that he could do options with that could either scroll or light up, scroll vertically as well. Um, and then that was sort of their look. And then reason they gave me the album so far in advance was I we were doing a fitting. They came in for a fitting, and I was starting to film a short film that I wanted to do, which became Prime Time of Your Life. I wanted to do a film on essentially body dysmorphia, um, based on a conversation I overheard between two 11-year-olds that really bothered me, and I just wanted to say something about it. So I was doing a short film, and they came in for a fitting for the new look and for the helmets, and they asked me why I was building all these pink skeletons and why I was building a bathroom in my shop and what was going on. So I told them the story of this girl whose self-perception is she's extremely overweight, and her interpretation of the media and everything else, posters, pop stars, people on TV, was they were skeletal, they were pink and like a bubblegum cute kind of thing, something that she wouldn't be able to achieve. And through the course of the story, you realize that she's totally fine and healthy and a normal size, but she perceives herself in the mirror one way. Sometimes the camera is her reflection. Sometimes the camera is looking at her. And in those instances, you see different versions of her. There's a lot of little layers to it. I was explaining the story to them. And then we finished the fitting and they left. And then when I was driving home, they said, if you're going to do this as a short film, we'd really like to score it for you. We'd love to score it for you for free. But if you listen to our new music and there's any song on there that you think supports your visuals, we'd love to have it be a music video instead. And I knew that meant that the audio for the short film would disappear. But I thought the visuals were odd enough that maybe that would be more interesting. So we decided on two songs originally. One was Primetime, the other one was Human After All. And Human After All actually was the beginning. It's so confusing. Human After All actually was something they wanted to do as a film about the robots wanting to be human. It was going to be a music video. It was going to be just a short, regular length music video, a couple of minutes. And that song was going to be a part of it. And that music video grew into the film Electroma. But that song was already taken because originally Human After All, which became Electroma, was going to incorporate that music. Once it became Electroma, the decision was made to not have any of Daft Punk's songs or music in it whatsoever, and have it literally be more about them expressing themselves visually as opposed to musically. So go back to your question. That's why I had early access to it, and I was very much aware of what they were trying to do. And my video was very dark, and they were embracing that. So it became very clear to me from the beginning that they were up for trying something different. And they had actually gone to New York and bought a camera. And I want to say it was from the sound stages where they shoot Sesame Street. It was an old analog camera that had a problem with it that they had stopped using, where if you moved it too fast, the image would smear or blur. It was just, the whole thing was burned out because it was really old. And they wanted that to be sort of the foundational look for all of the videos that came out of the Human After All album. So if you look at Robot Rock, it's a really good use of that. And then we kind of riffed on that sort of idea with Technologic and Primetime a little bit, where we were sort of pumping up some of the colors like reds or pinks or something like that, where we're trying to not incorporate the smear, but that old school sort of grainy vibe that old videos used to have. That was all intentional as part of that album. Sorry, that's a long answer. Did I even answer all the
Oh,
questions?
no, you're totally fine. I think that kind of hit the nail on the head. It's something that I remember noticing when I was younger and I was watching the music videos and just like kind of like it's always like a jarring transition between like the prime time of your life music video to the rest of them, because you look at Robot Rock and you look at like the more recently released one for Television Rules a Nation. It's like a very like 80s MTV glam rock kind of inspired look with like the motion blur and all this stuff. And then you have Prime Time of Your Life, which is such like a kind of has a huge message with it. And it's something that I kind of saw bleed over into Electroma as well, because there's also the scene where, they get all of that, all of that like wax figure head on, and then they're like ripping it off in the bathroom and throwing it in the mirror. And it's like super pathetic. And like, there's like this huge like score going on in the background. And I just thought that was really interesting. And it's very like refreshing to kind of see somebody have such a kind of borderline disturbing reality check and into like what it
Yeah.
is to be you know having to struggle with body dysmorphia, because it is like such a difficult thing to you know kind
Yeah.
of experience and live with. So that definitely really deeply resonated with me whenever I was like watching those back in, I don't know, like 10, 12 years ago, whenever I was a little bit younger. But moving on to the question to kind of propel off of this one, it is somewhat known for being Daft Punk's most shocking music video, and it is like pretty graphic towards the end as well. Did you kind of expect, or did you and Tomangi also expect that this would kind of be a little bit controversial for even the most hardcore fans of Daft Punk? And how do you think the legacy of this video and how it might have presented itself during the time and even now has kind of held up over the years?
It's interesting because I think when we did it, I think our references were a little more timely, like David Cronenberg and Videodrome and people and films like those that, the 80s weren't quite as far away when this debuted. And I think people had a little bit more of a point of reference. I think the jarring part was Daft Punk looking so pleasant for discovery, and then going darker. I think that was a little jarring for people. Social media wasn't in existence at the time, so there wasn't really any immediate feedback for us as far as how it went over. We just know that we put together something that we believed in, that we thought people would find interesting, and hopefully it would open up discussion or conversation about things maybe people would normally talk about. And that was kind of really all we cared about at the time. As time's gone on, you know, people say, "Oh, this gave me nightmares when I was a kid," and but keep in mind, I mean, I hear that about Chucky and a lot of the other stuff that we work on all the time, and my first question is always, "Your parents let you watch that?" But I know kids, want to see stuff like this, so we tried to do it in a manner that was cartoony and stylized. I mean, when Brianna's standing in the mirror looking at herself and everything's peeled away, and it's literally peeled away like a banana with the skin, and then there's fat molecules inside it, inside the peel, and then she's very clean and sterile as far as clean musculature. Same with the hands peeling off and stuff like that, and even the face. Everything's done with very clean lines and almost cartoon graphics sort of style, where you're trying to tell the story, but trying to do it in a manner that's not a gross out. There's no blood, there's no goo or anything like that. We're trying to really um, keep it as less offensive as possible and still be able to tell that story. Does that make sense?
It totally makes
Yeah,
sense.
for
And like,
sure.
for lack of a better phrase, it is like in its raw form. Like, pardon like the pun, but like, I wouldn't think it would be done in any better way without it, getting, a little bit offensive, as you were saying. But if anything, it was like the most tasteful route. And I just think it's a really beautiful piece of art, honestly. Like, I still go back
Thanks.
to it to this day and just kind of marvel at everything that happens and like how much it really just encapsulates just societal pressures on
Yeah.
everything. So
And to me, primetime and Electroma were really all about, who are you? Who do you want to be? Why do you think you want to be that? Be comfortable in who you are. But there's all this pressure coming in from outside all the time that weighs heavily on people. And for kids, it's a lot heavier than I think a lot of adults realize. And that was kind of the point of prime time. And then with Electroma, you've got these people that all they want to do is fit in. And even when they try and feel good about what they've done, they still don't feel true to themselves or that it's really accurate. And they go back to who they are. And in the end, I mean, the end speaks for itself on that one. I guess on both of them, well, the end on primetime is a little more ambiguous because you don't really know what happened. People have assumed a couple different things, and that was kind of the intent of it. And then with Electroma, it's pretty obvious that, one guy blows up and the other guy sets himself on fire and walks off into the desert in the middle of the night. And it's like, this is the end. But then you have to wonder,
It's
is
very
it?
edgy. It was definitely a very, very edgy time for them.
Yeah.
That time of your life was definitely kind of Primetime and Electroma were kind of the peaks of that, because in primetime, you see this poor girl, like, basically skinning herself alive, and then in Electroma, you
Mhm.
see these 2 beloved previous kind of bubblegummy robots just murder-suiciding out in the desert, which is really
Yeah,
intense for Daft Punk, considering
yeah.
how light and fun Discovery was. Yeah, it was definitely very edgy, kinda angsty, very blunt rock and roll time, in their career.
A great life anonymously, and then when they go into these helmets, all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure on them. It's kind of the opposite way it would be for real people, right? So I think there's a lot of layers and a lot of commentary in both of those. I think if you were to watch both of them again, I think you could get a lot out of that.
Yeah, people have definitely called, for lack of a better term, they've called prime time of your life kind of nightmare inducing as children watching it so young, not expecting,
Right,
what they were watch. And
right.
another, object of nightmares is that lovely, also skinned alive Chucky doll that we see,
Oh,
in the Logic video.
yeah,
We had several questions. Of course,
okay.
you've kind of covered it already talking about, your studio, but we had some questions. It was, where is the technologic animatronic or animatronics these days, and was it ever given a name? Because despite being one of the most iconic characters in Daft Punk's kinda lineup of characters, nobody knows what to call it.
We always called it the DJ. It was the robot DJ.
The DJ. Okay, that's, it's gonna be accepted as, like, the worldwide canon now that his name is the DJ.
Yeah. Paul Hahn, one of the producers, called it Mr. Cheese the whole time because the underskull for the head is the underskull from Chucky. So he was playing the, Chuck E. Cheese card with that. But it's sort of an amalgam of Chucky's head underskull, different brows than we did for Chucky at the time. Then some eyeballs that we made that could light up with LEDs. And then we had a smaller pair of teeth in it. We had longer arms that were prototyped from another version of a character named Glenn from the Chucky series as well. And so we sort of cobbled all these pieces together. We were originally going to put armor on it, and Tama really liked the way it looked minus the plating and stuff like that. So we stripped it back down to the understructure and left it as is. And then it has legs as well because you see it in the very beginning scenes where it's watching TV with Iman and Tama, and they're all sitting on the floor, and it's got little legs in front of it. But when we mounted it into the pyramid to shoot, we severed it at the hips because all the puppeteers for it are inside the pyramid or directly behind it because everything was cable controlled to operate the arms and the neck and the torso and everything like that. The face and the mouth were radio controlled, same as Chucky, but everything else was cable controlled. So a lot of hardware in there. And we've got some pictures like literally behind the scenes, behind the pyramid on that we'll put up on Alterian's Instagram page at one point. Or actually, honestly, if you go to Alterian's website, there's a feature that's photos, and you can go through and find Daft Punk, and um, uh, there's a lot of this stuff already in there too. So um, there's a
Really
lot
cool
to
how
look.
practical the effects were.
Yeah, I mean, that was my background, and we were always of the mindset that uh, if you can do it in person, better to do that. And to be quite honest, visual effects at the time were extremely limited and really expensive. So the idea of even like green screening out cables for the technologic robot, it's like, well, better to just take them straight into the pyramid and hide the operators inside the pyramid instead of spending any money on digital effects. It wasn't
Yes.
digital back then. It was all, computer graphics on film stock too. So on tape. Um, you have to keep in mind the timeline, you know, how long ago this was actually, how much technology has changed since then.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, so
something
you
that I feel
mentioned
like
earlier.
yeah. Sorry, you can go ahead, Artie.
Sorry, we're both just so eager to talk because it's
Yeah.
just so fascinating. We're learning so much today. We were just wondering, so you mentioned earlier that there's 3 DJs, 3 Mr. Cheeses.
Yes,
Um,
there's 3 DJs. The one for the shoot was disassembled
oh
and
no.
ceased to exist. We did a museum retrospective in Paris a few years ago. It was electronic music, and it was at the Philharmonique du Paris in Paris. And we rebuilt the pyramid and we rebuilt the robot. We had most of the stuff already existing. We built a duplicate of it because it was actually set up as an audio animatronic so that when you went into the museum, there were figures of the guys, the band standing in front of it with guitars in their arms that were stationary. And then the little guy actually could move his arms around and his eyes and brows and head and mouth moved. And he just kept repeating the loop, buy it, use it, fix it, you know, that whole thing just for 8 hours a day. And they had a little TV screen behind him, basically rebuild a portion of the set in the museum. And that ran for a while. And that refurbished version of the DJ is what we currently have. And if I was at my studio right now, he'd be right here behind me, staring at you through this entire interview. But
I don't
we'll
think
do it.
you understand like how much that would get screen capped and just blown up over social media. Like, oh my gosh, the technologic baby is still alive. That's what everyone was calling it for so many years. It's
Oh,
just
the
like
baby,
technologic
interesting.
baby. Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess because they just, it was small. So, baby.
yeah.
But
No, it's definitely baby sized, you know. And the head that, like I said, we use that for babies for electroma. So um, that's a good name, baby DJ.
yeah, I think it was, I mean, there's so many different variations. Honestly, I could probably go on for probably 10 minutes talking about all the ones that I've heard over the years, but I'm glad that we
That's
finally have some confirmation on that at least. But yeah, so I guess you guys need to keep a lookout on the Alterian Inc. website to see some more behind the scenes pictures and stuff. So, moving on to a somewhat lighter toned video, circling back to the Television Rules the Nation music video, which has just been officially released. Were you involved in the design and production of this video? And why was it never released originally, to your knowledge? Oh, maybe
yeah.
that's why.
I was not involved in that one at all. And I know Warren's done like a walking cycle thing through time of the robots, and we gave him a bunch of information on the technologic robot so he could incorporate that into it. Um, but there's a lot of stuff that was done or built and never saw the light of day. There are a lot of treatments written for different songs that things didn't come together for. So it's kind of cool that some of that stuff is resurfacing now or being shared.
Yeah, it's been a pretty sorry, my keyboard's being very rude to me right now, but it's been a very like cryptic kind of I guess underground little like snippet that's been circulating on YouTube for I don't even know how long at this point. And so it's nice to see that it like exists and it's in a much higher quality than it was before. I think it was like in 240p like at the very
Oh,
beginning
really?
of its yeah, it was I don't even know exactly where it was originally sourced from, but really interesting
Yeah,
to
I don't
hear
think they
that
know either. It
yeah,
doesn't sound like anybody knows how it got onto the internet.
yeah, someone
That would be
somewhere
nice.
got fired
Interesting.
very soon after, I'm sure. But
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, like that one in Robot Rock, basically, you know, we'd visit set and we had nothing to do because at that point they were self-sufficient with the helmets and, you know, unless things needed repair or something accessorized in some new manner, there wasn't really anything for us to do. Um, Thomas was proficient in writing code and stuff for his arm gauntlets for the very first helmets. Within the first day of the first fitting, he was really into it. And they're smart guys and super articulate and know what they want. So um, we just
Yeah,
step
it sounds
back
like
and serve them.
they had a vision and they were all in on it. That's really
Yeah,
great.
yeah. And when we did the
Speaking
very first sculptures, they would try and explain like, well, maybe this could be a little over to this side, or because we were like in the beginning, we did head casts of them, and we were sculpting in clay over their head casts so we could make sure their nose and their eyes and their mouths lined up so they could see and breathe and stuff like that with what we were doing to them. At a certain point, I remember, well, why don't you just put your hands on it and push the clay around and show us what you want? And they actually got their hands into it, which I thought was really fun. I think for all of us, to be honest. Um, and then towards the end, when we got into the electronics, like I said, Tama really got into wanting to know the literal nitty gritty of the circuitry and how things worked and how the programming worked. And brought his computer and plugged into it and was into it right away. So a lot of times, once they had the stuff they needed, it was just us sitting back going, I wonder what they're gonna do next. But our relationship with them was always very sort of casual and collaborative, like them working on, you know, my music video, which became theirs. And Thomas was the cameraman and Guy was the producer, and I was the director. Lead actresses, the little girl at both ages. So it was always we shot it in my shop. It was always very casual relationship where if we had ideas, we would just share them. And sometimes they turned into things and sometimes they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a, good segue into the next question of things either turning into things or not turning into other things. So Electroma started out as the music video for Human After All. We've learned
Mhm.
that it almost didn't, but that's how it came to
Yeah.
be. But
Yeah.
after returning to Los Angeles, viewing the footage, Daft Punk decided to go back to the desert, shoot more scenes, and extend it into the cult classic film that we know today. Did your
Right.
role change when that decision was made? You were credited as associate producer, but was this the case when it was still just a music video? What did the involvement look like as the
That was the case when it was still the music video because the music video version still involved a city full of robots. So there was just a ton of work to do, and there was no money. We're all pitching in to make it happen. So we're kind of all producing it together and pulling each other along. But it started out as a shoot for a regular music video, and then I swear it was only a few days prior to us going to shoot it. Tama decided that we would shoot on film, and he'd been reading up on film cameras, and we switched everything out, and he ended up running a film package and buying film from Kodak, and suddenly we weren't on that low res video camera anymore. This was going to be a totally different thing. Then when we got it, when we shot it, I think it went through two stages actually. There was the realization of this could be a short film. Let's go back and add more to this because there's more areas of the story where that could be fleshed out visually that are kind of getting sort of glossed over. It'd be nice to fill that out. So we went back and we filmed to make a short film, and then in editing that together, realized that the short film was actually getting pretty long, and it wouldn't take much to add some more to that to make it feature length. And I think Tomas' only agenda was just to have something that would play at a midnight movie screening that people could go to and just enjoy a weird movie. And it just kept growing. And it started out as I think a 2 minute, 3 minute music video. And then it opened the Cannes fortnight, the Cannes Film Festival when it was actually done. So it had an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear how everything evolved. This is a lot of information that the fans just really didn't know beforehand, so I really appreciate, and I'm sure everyone here that's listening appreciates all of your insight. And it's just, very interesting to see now that, Daft Punk has kind of hung up their very nice leather jackets that had the Daft Punk logo embedded on the back, to kind of hear like the behind the scenes of everything. But we're gonna move on to some more fan questions actually. So Lorelai asks, I don't know if you were involved with the special effects of Electroma, i.e. the explosion and fire scenes, but if you were, how were they achieved? Also, did you have to make Toma's helmet out of a different material for the explosion scene to make it shatter in the way that it did? Or did you use one of the already made ones out of the standard material?
Okay, a lot of little questions in there too, but yes, I was involved in everything from the bodysuits that are visible when their clothes come off. I don't know if you can tell, but they don't have true human anatomy. Everything's sort of like planed and smoothed out. There's no pectoral muscles. The shoulders are a flat line. There's bodysuits that they wear. There's the detonators on their back. There's the fake animatronic hand that catches on fire. There's the exploding version of Tama, which was actually run in a rigid polyfoam, which is, I think, the closest comparison just in like the general market would be the spray foam that you use to insulate windows. That once it dries, it's hard. Imagine that in black. We had a body cast of Tama, and we painted that black, and we cast that in this rigid foam. And normally rigid foam comes with a flame retardant in it. We asked the manufacturer if we could eliminate the fire retardant so that it would ignite more, which once it vaporizes, it's just insane what's possible. But we took that black rigid foam body, and he doesn't have a jacket on at that point. It's just the pants. And we took a version of the pants and we cut them into small pieces and spray glued them back onto the body form so that when the body exploded, the pants would come apart in pieces as opposed to them staying together and everything else exploding out around it. We cast rigid foam copies of his helmet so they would explode exactly the same way. Cast those in black polyfoam, and then we had them vacuum metallized so that they looked the same and there wasn't anything hard in the foam that could hurt anybody. We took all the rivets out of the pants and everything else ahead of time as well because we didn't want anything flying that could become basically shrapnel. I mean, we were in the middle of the desert and had a camera, and all the crew was really far away and in tents and behind cars and stuff. But even so, you never know what's going to happen. And then those were rigged by the special effects team proper that are responsible for explosions and weather and stuff like that. And I believe they had purchased primer cord, which people used to blow up tree stumps, and we ran that through the body. We had created cavities through the body that we could run the cord all the way through so everything would explode evenly, because we're trying to get something almost musical where it kind of like mushroom cloud, and then the black would show up against the background, and then you'd also have some sort of a fireball hopefully in that as well. And then we sort of staked that into the ground in the desert, blew that up, and then all those pieces were just shards of rigid foam basically. When Guy-Man takes off his helmet, there's a whole headpiece that the wearer has that has a flat plane in the front of it that has some circuitry in it. And that was a whole head shell that's cheated. We cheated some sizes, but that was all done practically with a person inside it the whole time. And then when he's looking at his hand, it's an animatronic hand that has a foam latex skin on it that we could actually set on fire, just put some rubber cement on it and let it burn. And then when he takes his helmet off, prior to that, we created a helmet that was cast out of like a rigid um, really brittle fiberglass type resin. We slush cast that so that it was hollow. We put all sorts of wires and stuff in that. And then the visor was part of it was paint and part of it was plastic, and that was something that he could actually shatter on the ground practically. And then he takes a piece of that and picks it up, and that's how he creates the heat source, like as a magnifying glass, onto his hand. He's holding in his real hand a piece of the broken helmet, and then we've got the um, animatronic hand that catches on fire, and then that burns. And then once it gets to the point where we see him walking through the night and his whole body's on fire, that was the pyrotechnics department with a stunt person rigged properly in a suit that is a normal traditional burn suit. And we didn't have anything to do with that part of it. And then the rest of our stuff on that was all the robots of the town, obviously, and then the whole scene where they become people or try and become people, as well as the scene where all that stuff is sort of coming apart and they're, flushing it down the toilet and all that kind of stuff. Um, the stuff that's poured on their heads, when we did their life cast, we used alginate, which is a plant-based material that you normally do to cast an impression of somebody's hands or heads so that you can design makeup effects on them. And they had experienced that when we did the helmets the very first time. So the idea was when the robots were wanting to become human, they would have something similar poured on them that would set up. So we actually used alginate and tinted it orange so that it had a more interesting color to it, and actually poured it on the guys, not Alex and Iman, but the two actors that were playing them, while they were in these barbers chairs. And then we had built these green screen suits for Seed of Chucky. They were actually built in Romania for us, that had this like weird dome top to the head that was like a tube. They almost looked like beekeeper suits. And we had those in the shop when we were working on Prime Time, and the puppeteers were wearing them. Those became the design influence for the white suited guys inside the compound where the robots are trying to become human. So our wardrobist at Alterian, Lisa, also designed the white suits for the people to wear as the technicians, and then the people inside the white suits were actually our crew. Um, People like Ken Banks and Howie Adams were in the suits, and they were actually doing the life casting of the robots because they normally do the life casting in our studio. And then we pre-made a bunch of giant eyeballs and noses, excuse me, and stuff that you could mix and match, like they were designing their face. And then we sculpted a version of each one of them that was just super distorted caricature version of them, big enough to fit over their helmets. So they were massive. So we had to build their shoulders out so that it didn't look too much like a Q-tip walking around, because they're seen walking around town before they go into the bathroom and pull everything off. We shot the bathroom stuff in my shop in the bathroom. The head skins for that were gelatin, because you can actually get gelatin to melt with a heat gun. So we're melting those practically. I'd done that on a movie called Darkman, like back in the 80s, and just used all the same technology all over again. Um, and then we actually literally flushed pieces of it down the toilet. Um, so there were a lot of different effects in that film, and I was responsible for all of them. It was a lot of work. We had a lot of people that went on set with us to make it work. Some of the hardest stuff was just the crowd scenes, because you had 20 some robots all in helmets walking during the day in costumes. Just the logistics of getting everyone suited and making sure people weren't bumping into each other and everything else. It was super challenging. And then everybody wanted to keep their helmet afterwards, so had to be the bad guys there too. But um, it just became progressively more involved, but loved every minute of it.
Yeah, that sounds like a really intense production process. It's really I can imagine how interesting that phone call is. Like, "No, we want this product to blow up. Please take the flame retardant out."
Yeah,
It's really
and to be honest, we had blown up someone in a movie again back in the 90s, and back then their material didn't have the flame retardant in it because it wasn't like a requirement. So we were trying to replicate it for Electroma. We couldn't get it to explode the same way. So we actually called them and went through their chemical list and what was in it and discovered that that was the main difference. So they were cool enough to work with us and create a batch specifically for us just for this effect because they wouldn't be able to sell it normally.
Oh, that's so dedicated. That's a little bit related to another question we have, kind of about adapting tools. Daft Rebel asks, would you make anything different if you were to have the tools you have now in
Oh,
2025 back in the day?
oh, for sure. I mean, everything would be different. It would be so much easier to do now. We were figuring it all out back then and working with technology that even we weren't familiar with, and it was so primitive. But now to 3D design and print the helmet, and then, if we wanted to cast and mold that, there's a lot of different materials. We'd be able to design the interior to incorporate fans and structures for batteries or standoffs or for the visors to clip on and be removable a lot easier. Um, there'd be no need for the giant backpack at all. All the circuitry for the faces would be so much simpler. Everything would be so much lighter. It would be a completely different world. I think about it every once in a while, just remembering Giman ask about a curved TV screen, which wasn't an option back then, but could be done now, obviously. I always wonder what that would look like to do that and then have something playing on that that looked like the old LED screens and then have it all just change while it's on somebody's head to something that's really smooth and clean. And I think that there's so much potential in what exists now. It it would have been amazing to have had that technology back then. And even
Yeah,
just to
it's
you can go on YouTube and people do tutorials on, how to wire electronics that weren't an option back then either. We were literally learning as we went.
Yeah, now you even have people on YouTube showing how they program their own, Daft Punk
Right,
helmets for their own
right.
use, and which is just really just shows like how true it is, even, within 20 years, how much everything has changed with the technology for special effects. And I always found those videos to be really interesting. Have you ever really delved into those at all, or like just
Which videos?
there's fans out
Oh,
there that
I mean,
have
like,
programmed their
tutorials,
own
yeah.
helmets. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really great work. There's some amazing stuff being done by the fans that's really impressive. Um, there's some great fan art too that I mean, I see some stuff and it's like, that needs to be a t-shirt. If it was a t-shirt, I'd wear it, you know? Um, just to have that social platform now to be able to share art and technology is pretty amazing. Keep in mind when we made the helmets, our reference were photos. If we played a video, it was a VHS. We took a photo of the TV screen so that we had reference for what we were sculpting. When we wanted to talk to the people in San Francisco, it was a phone call, which was super limited as to what sort of information could be shared. So somebody would have to get on a plane and fly down to discuss how something was going to be wired. There was just so much more work and time and money that was required back then. Um, it's literally a different world.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Um, okay, so there is another question that kind of related to what you were speaking of earlier with interacting with the robots themselves. We have the, let me see, Unhelpful Git asks, what is a memorable experience you had with the duo themselves? Just like a small interaction or something about them that stood out to you.
Something that stood out. I mean, to be honest, the thing that was the most moving to me was them taking the time to call me after they left this shop, my shop, and the fitting to offer to score my short film. I just thought that meant the world that they believed in the idea, and they said that, we can't get it out of our head, and we'd really like to help. Um, that's just very indicative of who they are as people. Um, that stands out probably more than anything. I think too the design phase where we were trying different things on them, trying to figure out how to make it work, especially like our first fitting, was interesting because and very memorable because a lot of times what you design on paper is different in person, and it was one of those moments. It was sort of that aha moment for a lot of us in regards to some of the aesthetics of the original design because originally like the robots had hair. They were very anime style, trench coat hair. um, Tama had a silver collar and a shoulder pad plate that was part of his overall look as well. And just having to try all that on and realizing how much mass was added and how movement was limited, really helped define the characters. And that was a really fun experience figuring that out as well.
That's
So I'd say
interesting that
those.
not only they ditched the wigs, but also shoulder pads.
Yeah, well, you kind of had to like it kind of stopped you being able to move because the shoulder piece had a collar, like a short, almost like a priest jacket collar that was all chrome that connected to these chrome shoulder pads. It was all one piece. So like if you picked up one shoulder, the whole thing moved. It wasn't like it was separate pieces. It looked great when it was stationary or for like photos, like just a really cool look. But as far as practicality of walking or moving, it was just a little too limiting for the character. And I know they embraced the limitations of the suit for C3PO in Star Wars and made that part of the character of the robot. But I think the idea here was to not have those sort of limitations in place. Um, and again, too, adding that mass just shortens your neck that much more, and your head's already oversized. So trying to keep a neck on him was really important because their original designs for the hands and the necks were ribbed rubber hoods and ribbed rubber gloves that had the plates on the back sides. So there's a lot of extra mass on there that eventually went away and became just spandex. But in the very beginning, it was a lot more substantial and a lot warmer inside as well.
Aw, it's a shame that they could've been a little more campy because that would've been a lot of fun, but, sacrifices have to be made.
A lot of the earlier photos, you can tell the difference in the hands. Even the shapes of the plates are rounder and a little fatter and stuff too. But you can see the palms in some of the original old photos. You can definitely make out the neck rings and stuff like that.
Yeah, we had a question come in about, the LEDs, oh god, I hope I don't butcher this. Dutch Vanderland asks, with the Discovery helmets, which helmet was the hardest to make and program the LEDs for?
I would say Gimon. And part of making the LEDs work was also setting it up so that he could see. And what we ended up doing was taking a big piece of clear acrylic and drilling out holes in it for each one of the LEDs. So the drill holes had to be centered and perfect in alignment, mechanically perfect, horizontally and vertically, and then as well on a curve. And then all the LEDs had to be mounted at the exact same depth. And then all the wires, the three wires for each LED had to be pulled off to the side in groups that would allow some sort of clearance in the middle for him to be able to see. So just that section of his head alone was the most complex. And then programming it. It just involved more than Tomas because Tomas was basically text for the most part and a couple little simple graphics. But Iman's had moving patterns and arrows and patterns that move through patterns. And that was all new for all of us.
I always kind of expected it because in a visual standpoint, there's kind of a lot more going on with Guy-Man's Discovery helmet than Toma's, just because of you have like the rainbow LEDs on the side, and then like you also have like the different icons that would show up on his screen at the same time. I think his was a little bit less hands-on than Toma's was, since you mentioned that he was able to kind of program his own throughout
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So that's really cool. So another fan question now is asking, following the progression of Daft Punk's quest for humanity from technology, how much do you think Electroma served as a visual perspective for this ideal almost 20 years later?
I think the fact that they used the end of the movie as their announcement for them ceasing to exist as a group kind of says it all, you know, because
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
they used the scene where they die basically to say that they were, you know, no more.
That's kinda shocking.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was it was interesting to see that sorry, I have birds and they're going crazy right now. One second. Artie, if you want to take over while they're tweeting super loudly.
Yeah, I got it. Animals, they love to be involved. Yeah, it was definitely a really fascinating note to go off on, very, very graphic. I think it was,
Mhm.
Busy P. Pedro who once mentioned in an interview that, that ending of Electroma, originally, they were kinda playing with the idea of that being the end of the robots,
Right.
they were thinking about shedding that. Do you have any
Yeah.
insight on that decision making that they were toying around with?
When we were filming, that was the big debate. It's like, okay, are we all done now? Is this the end? Are we is this history? And we didn't know for a long time because I think, there was a lot of gravity to the situation for them as artists and what they wanted to do. And I know that they had other interests as well. So we were all wondering that for quite a while. And I think,
Oh,
once
yeah.
you get distance from things, sometimes you appreciate them more and maybe do more. And I think that's, a little bit of distance help sort of get them comfortable with doing more stuff. And again, this is just my opinion, not I'm not quoting anybody or paraphrasing anyone. But I think having some distance from it made it easier to go back into it without the weight.
I mean, it's nice that that didn't spell the end of the robots because I'm not sure what their legacy would have looked like if they had shed it after all.
So
It
and
would have been a
back
very
then,
cold end.
yeah, we wouldn't have had any of the, you know, collaborations with anybody.
For sure. Kinda just reminiscing on how much was done for the practical effects of Electroma, how much involvement there was in getting everything just right with that perfectionism. Can you think of any other, practical, like, problem solving you had to do with any of the music videos you worked on or on Electroma, that
Um,
was maybe kind of a creative problem solution that you had to come up with?
I think the only other video we had where there were issues where we had to figure out an approach was the one for Instant Crush, where the two statues in the museum are supposed to be old style wax sculptures that melt together in an embrace of sorts in the very end. And how do you make that happen and look realistic and do it in a manner that's controlled that doesn't look um, silly? I mean, how do you melt somebody down and have them keep the design aesthetic that you want through the melt process? So we ended up having different stages of melt based on the storyboards, and we would do different sculptures that were progressive that showed further melt. But the biggest issue was actually just getting the material to weld because we did it in gelatin like we did for the robot faces, their human faces in Electroma. It would just sort of slough off and become sort of hideous. And we wanted sort of a, a beautiful aspect to the two statues that melt together in the warehouse. So we experimented around with a lot of different paraffins and genuine waxes and painting features on them versus changing the ratio of wax to filler and using makeup instead of paint and using a makeup paint that's called Pax paint that would actually keep the face together and let it sort of deflate, but that didn't sort of get that sort of merging of these two bodies together. So we ended up taking a piece of metal and basically like a giant cookie pan, cookie sheet, and heating it up and experimenting with melting um, heads in that in order to get what we wanted. And what we ended up doing was building a piece of the floor in metal and texturing it to look like concrete, putting it up on blocks and then having a heat source underneath it, sort of recreating that hot cookie sheet idea, just 3 feet by 4 feet, so that we had enough space to melt the guys' heads and stuff like that. Then we could control the melt from below and actually get them to compress down without the faces distorting, and we made them hollow so we could blow the heat gun air into the inside so we could get them to soften. And then we did mostly acrylic paint actually for the features so that they would stay sort of together and sort of slide with the face. So that was the only other one where there were really technical issues to deal with. The beginning of that, I mean, we got a 3D scan of Julian and then molded that and sculpted the soldier's head out of that. And then the other head we just freeform sculpted based on reference photos that Warren had. Warren Fu, the director, had for what he wanted the aesthetics of the character to look like, and the wardrobe and everything else.
How was that like working with Julian and having to make that cast over him? That seems like a really tedious process.
He was 3D scanned actually, so it took him probably maybe a minute to hold still to do it. And he was not in the United States when we started pre-production on that. So the scan was done overseas, I believe, actually, and then they just sent us the information, and then we printed it out here in the US and then molded that, did a clay copy, then resculpted the clay copy to look more stylized like a statue and sculpted the hair on it and stuff like that. Um, and then
Oh,
the
I
hands
see.
were just generic hands that we used. And some of those hand sculptures were sculpted where they were melted together. And we were just running two clay hands out of two hand molds we had and then changing the sculpture, molding that. And then we cast that in wax. So his only involvement with our side of that story was just the couple minutes that he had to sit in a chair for someone for the scan. That was it.
Wow. Well, I guess that kind of made everything a lot easier than it would
Really
have.
easy. Yeah, yeah. That's kind of the norm of how we work nowadays. So it's really nice.
Yeah. Um, Kind of propelling off of this one yet again, Maddox asks, what was your favorite animatronic or puppet that your company made?
And my company's made animatronic. Boy, I would say probably honestly, probably um Chucky in the last season of the TV series, which was about a year ago. Because there was him normal and then him as this decrepit, gross little old man version of himself. Um, and there's just so much character in that puppet. It's just really fun to do. And Brad Dorff is really great to work with. And the puppeteers, we've been doing the show for 3 years, and there's a really nice shorthand because you've got different people playing different aspects of the character. Like I'm just the eyebrows, somebody else is the eyeballs and the eyelids, someone else is the mouth, someone else is the head, and you all have to kind of be in sync. And I think that technically that was probably the most difficult, but most rewarding. So that would probably be my favorite. Prior to that, we did an animatronic cat for Hocus Pocus. That was Binks, the black cat. And sometimes they use a real cat, sometimes they use an animatronic one. They would put a CG face. This was the beginning of CG, a CG face on the puppets or the real cats. So that was the first time different techniques were melded together. So that was really fun to figure out as well. Plus, that was also a character, which it's always nice to put personality inside something.
So iconic. So yeah, when we opened with, "Oh, if you don't know Tony Gardner's work," yes, you do. So that's definitely, the shout out Binks from Hocus Pocus, we love that. Kind of on that topic, if you're recommending, kinda going through your catalog of really impressive work to people, what what would you recommend people watch first to really get a feel for
Oh
the sort of
boy.
special effects that you do, what you have to bring to the industry, which is an amazing catalog worth of work?
They're all so different. I mean, Daft Punk is great from a sort of wardrobe and robotics perspective, character design. The Geico Caveman is great from character design and doing something really realistic with hair work and teeth and making that believable. But like, I think we're known for that. We're known for the old age makeups for the Jackass TV series and Bad Grandpa. And those were all done where you'd have someone in a makeup interacting with real people and make it believable. Um, we did the same thing on Sacha Baron Cohen for a TV series called Who is America and pranked people like in the government and stuff like that. And we had to make people that, on build characters on Sacha Baron Cohen that were real. That's a good example of character makeup. Hocus Pocus, Billy Butcherson and the cat from the first film, and then Billy in the book from the second are good examples of solid character design that, shows off the work between like wardrobe department, as well as hair and makeup and everything else. I think those are probably the main ones that we get known for. And then of course anything with Chucky, who seems to be eternally popular in the fall, along with Billy Butcherson. We did the Addams Family movies and a movie called The Craft. So a lot of that stuff plays a lot on TV in the fall. And those are all good examples of props or makeups or special effects that we've done, or miniatures even, really.
Yeah, it's just so expansive, like, it's really just very prolific, it's incredible.
Oh,
With your
thanks.
work with Daft Punk in specific, when you're when you kinda introduce people to your work with Daft Punk, what do you point to first to say, "This was us, this was me, this is what we contributed to" not just Daft Punk, but also, like, pop culture in general?
I think everybody knows the helmets so well. That's kind of all you have to point to. It's like we just did this movie called Heart Eyes, and we designed the killer, and it's a mask with heart eyes, and it's supposedly supposed to look sort of like the emoji. And got a lot of response from that, and that's literally all we did in the movie. We didn't design any of the makeup effects. It was all done in New Zealand. But a lot of times when you design something that people consider iconic or recognizable, like even the Geico caveman, it's like you can just say the name and people imagine the face or the head before anything else, or the mask or the helmet. And that's really it. And those icons sort of become the symbols that you share with people to explain what you do for a living.
Yeah, it's incredible. With all of your work, this was a question we saw pop up quite a bit. What advice would you share with young artists really wanting to break into the world of special effects and practical effects and makeup?
I think the most important thing you can do is try to do as much as you possibly can. And again, take advantage of YouTube tutorials nowadays. Do some of your own work, but post it, share it, show the world what you're able to do, because a lot of people come to us for like job interviews, and they can tell us they've done a million different things, but if they can't show us, there's a lot of people that only talk and don't do. So you want to be able to show what you're able to do. I think being able to share a portfolio, whether it's your Instagram page that you've set up just for your artwork, or however other way, whatever other ways you want to show it, is great. My youngest daughter, Kira, started a YouTube channel, and she was doing like short films and stuff, and she started posting those on that. And that showed people what she was capable of doing. And I think it just validates what you've done, and being able to get questioned by people about what you do or how you do it, I think helps you grow as a person and as a communicator too. And I think this is a very collaborative industry, and you work really long hours with people, and you're really going to want to get along with someone and enjoy their company if you're stuck with them for a 16-hour shoot day. I can't stress enough how many people we have not hired because they had a bad attitude. They might have been amazing artists, but the idea of fighting for what I want, or having somebody be a negative influence on a process that's on a deadline, um, is a huge factor in how, like, we would hire, you know. But I think once you have examples of your work, it's just trying to get those out there to other people to show them what you do. And there's groups now where you can do that, but there's also all the major shops, myself and other ones included, have Instagram pages where you could DM and say, "Hey, can I show you my um, resume?" Or, "Here's a link to my Instagram portfolio. I'd love to get some feedback," or whatever. I mean, just try and reach out to people. The ability to do that now exists so much easier, and I would say take advantage of it. There's a lot of really great artists that do amazing stuff, but they sit in their bedroom and they don't share it with anybody. If they wanted to put it out in the world, you have to make the effort to do that. And a lot of artists are pretty shy and introverted, so I know it's a real effort for some people, but it's an effort that's well worth it. I was one of those kids, and you know, it worked out for me.
Yeah, it really is just about putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
shooting your
Oh, and
shot.
the other one too. My other one would be say yes to anybody who like asks you for anything within reason, of course. But like, I remember I was just starting out, and a friend of mine was an actor, just because I knew him in college, and he was starting to audition for movies, and he was hired to play a punk rocker, and he was very clean cut and straight teeth, and he asked if I would make him a set of teeth that were crooked and stained and gross so that he could be more this punk rock character to go in for the first script read with the director. And I made those for him, and the director wanted um, the actor's dentist friend to come to a meeting at his house because he was thinking maybe putting teeth into changing the teeth on one of the lead actresses. So I was 21 at the time, and I went to the director's house, and the director kept looking past me when I was at the door. Thought I had driven the actor's dentist friend to the meeting, and I was the dentist friend. I was just a student, and I had a stack of photos with me of other things that I had done. And one of them was this Halloween decoration I was building that was a skeleton with like long blonde hair. And the director said, "Oh, that's interesting. Our film has a character like that in it, actually, but it's being built by an audio animatronic company that does restaurants like Chuck E. Cheese. Um, but your thing's really cool." And I said, "Thanks." Well, 2 weeks later, that company goes bankrupt. Director tells his producer to call me to come in and have a meeting about building them their animatronic skeleton woman for their movie, which shoots in 2 weeks. And I said, "Yeah, I do the meeting." And then I had already had a job during the day. I was building aliens for this movie called Cocoon. Um, and I had a full-time job. I said, I'm 21, I'll work nights, I'll do this on my own. I got some friends to help me actually do pieces of it. And then in 2 weeks' time, I delivered it to set. They loved it. They asked me to puppeteer it and operate it on camera. And the producer who had been very scary, that very first meeting, asked me what I'd like my screen credit to read. And I had my first screen credit, my first puppeteering job, my first character that was 100% my own, which was this half corpse for this movie, Return of the Living Dead. I was 21, all because I said yes to a pair of teeth to a friend of mine as a favor. You never know how things are going to go, how things are going to work out. Be positive would be my ultimate bit of advice.
Oh, yeah, it really is about putting yourself out there. We're
Yeah,
right
why
at
not?
time, but I really wanna wrap us up on this, question that we've had coming in, which is, what are some things that you learned while working with Daft Punk and on these artistic projects? Human After All, the music videos, Electroma, Instant Crush, the helmets, that you've brought with you?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that collaboration is extremely rewarding, and collaboration quite often leads to a better idea. You might throw 5 horrible ideas back and forth, but having the confidence to throw them out there, one of those bad ideas might spur something brilliant that you wouldn't have thought of until you went down that road sideways. Um, I learned working with friends is amazing. My daughters, Brianna and Kira, were both in the primetime music video, and I learned that you can either be a dad or be a director. You can't wear too many hats when you're one of them is in Fantasyland and one is in the real world, especially when you're asking people to do difficult things. And I sort of carried that with me about delegating responsibility for projects so that everything can be done to its best potential all the time. I think those are the main takeaways. Um, and that a lot of times too, people are doing things for the first time, and just because they seem more confident to you doesn't mean they necessarily are. They're just using less words and being calmer, and they might feel exactly the same way you do. So the more that you can be yourself and be direct and honest from the beginning, the more amazing stuff you can create and the better relationships you can create as well.
Yeah, that's some really great advice. I hope that I know for a fact that there's definitely people listening in that, are just holding on to every word when it comes to, working in this industry, and not just practical and special effects in general, but just, as an approach to art in general, the act of creation.
And go out there too. There, like if you're into genre stuff that's more like horror related, um, there are a lot of conventions like Monster Palooza and shows like that where there are Midsummer Scream down in Long Beach, where there are vendors and people that are creating their own art for sale, and they have booths. And you don't have to go there just to buy. You can go there and just talk to the people, and you'll find it's really inspiring. And you'll find a lot of people that are very similar to yourself that you'd be really surprised that you wouldn't have been able to meet otherwise. And put yourself out there, you know, and take some examples of your work, and maybe you could collaborate with one of those artists on something that they're doing. Anything's possible, really. You just have to push. Someone described life to me once as you're in the airport and you're on a moving sidewalk, but the sidewalk is moving in the opposite direction. If you stand still, you're going to get left behind. If you're walking, you're going to keep pace with reality. If you push forward, you'll be able to make things happen. And I'm sort of paraphrasing it, but that's, I think, a good way to live. Put a little energy out every day towards the things that you want to do, not just in my mind, oh, I want to do this. It's like do something that is in that direction, whether it's a drawing or reading something or writing something. Just put some time into it, and it's cumulative. And before you know it, you didn't learn to ride a bike the first time you got on it by yourself. You know, it takes work and it takes practice. So get on it, so to speak.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. That's a really good way to look at both the creative arts and also life, is just pushing ahead, not just settling for keeping up, but also just, the sky's the limit, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And don't think it has to be money because social media is free. So you can market yourself. I mean, everything is marketing nowadays. You have the resources to do it, so why not do it?
Yeah, it's just shoot for the stars.
Yeah.
But that will put us right at time. Tony, thank you so much again for coming in today.
No, my
We had
pleasure.
just really fantastic questions. We learned a lot of really just completely fascinating things, and I'm sure everybody, myself included, is really excited to be able to see what you and your company have to show us that perhaps never saw the light of day from Human After All. Because
Yeah,
that
well,
sounds fascinating.
after, some time's gone by and you guys wanna do this again, let me know and I'll pull out a bunch of old stuff and share it with you guys on camera.
Yeah, we would love that, and I know, a certain movie also has a birthday next year, so I'm sure we'll
Oh,
definitely have, another chance to talk all about, some of our favorite footage from the robots and some of your work.
yeah.
But yeah, thank you so, so much for stopping in. I see everybody's in the chat thanking you for your time and very
Yeah, you guys are
excited to have you
welcome.
back in the future.
My pleasure.
But yeah, thank you
Anytime.
so much for stopping in.
Alright, well, have a good day.
Thank you so much, Tony. Have a great rest of your day.
Alright, see you guys.